And we're going to talk now to someone who has experience on the ground and who's going to give us an overview of this complex and fast-moving field of international cooperation. Someone who started on the ground, as I said, in South America and Africa for various organizations in the areas of forestry, rural development and coordination. Bert Geiser, you then became a trainer and a counselor, advising people at all stages of this career. And I notice in this room there are probably people who are at the very beginning of this journey and people who have gone some way in it already. You've been doing this for 13 years. Your contribution is titled Many Roads Lead to Timbuktu. Now, Timbuktu nowadays evokes, conjures many different images, and I think that's what you're going to tell us about. Thank you very much, Beat.
Good morning. So, over the next 30 minutes, roughly, I will talk to you about entering international cooperation, directed at you who are at some stage of entering this field. This might be, you might have made first steps, or you maybe are also just in the first stage of thinking about, or want to know more about this field, which is actually very important, because this one point I will going into. First, you have to know what it actually is. Many roads lead to, Many roads leads to international cooperation. However, it's not like Rome, so it's not just any path that will lead you there. That's also the reason why in the first part of my presentation I will go into, have a closer look at what is it actually, international cooperation, the field you are approaching. And then in the second part we will look at entering, what's important, what you have to pay attention to when you want to enter this field. And towards the end I'll share a few thoughts about how to navigate such a career. Timbuktu, here we are. When I talk to people, or I've talked to many people, I just realized Timbuktu has something magic in these names. It's also people who have absolutely no relation to international cooperation, who have never been there. I include myself. And when we have this, when there's something that's sounding in this, in the name, we have associations. And yeah, let's have a look. So it could be the place, the cultural heritage of this place, or maybe the Sahel, dry arid African regions, or is your association the desert, people living in it, music, or is it maybe the more recent event like in 2012 when Timbuktu was overrun sadly by extremists and many things were destroyed and the UN was intervening there. Now, let's translate this metaphor, international cooperation. For some people, I realize it has also like a fascination that goes with it, and with fascination there come as well associations. So just think a few seconds. What are your first thoughts or your first images when you think international cooperation? Maybe it was water, bringing water to communities. If so, was your first association more the engineering part, or was it about how to organize communities to keep that water running? Or maybe more shelter for refugees, emergency situations? Or were you thinking of medical aid? Who was thinking of workshops? Maybe more were thinking about the UN, maybe high-level visit to some operations of the UN. Or have you been thinking of negotiations, meetings? All this is international cooperation. And so you see, it depends really what are you looking for. Actually, entering international cooperation is kind of a weird statement because it depends where in it you want to go. And if these are associations we make, then they are always partial, it's natural. So we have to do a reality check actually and look what is it really, what I am going to find there. We can take a definition, that's maybe the more scientific approach, and it remains quite general, so it will not help much. My suggestion is let's look at activities and who does what. Then we come closer to the field. Who does what? It's just one important thing I want to say. International corporations, it goes always through organizations, institutions. All the work of individuals goes through institutions. That's an important part to understand. So to see clearer in this many organizations active in international cooperation, I'll propose a structure to you. Let's look if this, you imagine a landscape, and we can group these actors roughly. So we can divide it in 4 areas. This is not science, this is just to help structure. You will see there, when you look at specific organizations, there always overlaps or an organization that works in different fields, but it's still helpful. So we have humanitarian aid as one field, so everything that's emergency, natural or man-made disaster. It's mainly about reduce suffering and striving to get a society, a country back to the state it was before. Then, second, development cooperation, so all the rather long-term efforts in different fields, being education, environment, health. That's mainly in the long term. Then, and here you see this is also something that is a way part of development. We put it here aside to make it more visible. All the efforts in economic, financial cooperation that tend to not be seen as much. Also, there are many private sector actors in there. So this is about, on one side, financing or finance cooperation between states, but also we are talking about microfinance, economic development, microinsurance, etc. And finally, this blue, the last part, this is probably the most explicitly political part, peace promotions and human security. In a way, it's also the basis, because imagine without minimum stability and security about human rights, the other sectors, it's difficult to work, especially in the development fields. In an unstable environment, it's very difficult. So all this is international cooperation. Let's go a step further. Within each of these areas, you can differentiate different organizations, types of organizations, from state actors, multilateral organizations, to non-governmental organizations, training or organization institutions working in training and research, all that. So this makes another difference. If you approach these fields, it makes a big difference where do you start, and then also within which type of organizations. Now we are at the stage type of organizations. Within these organizations, there are so many, there's still a huge variety. Let's just take the example of non-governmental organizations. Think at the difference between an organization with several hundred employees in Switzerland and abroad, working in different countries, having several programs in each country, as compared to an organization, a non-governmental organization with 3 to 5 employees, maybe active in one country with one topic, one program. This shapes a lot the actually everyday life when you are working in international cooperation. So have a close look at how does this organization work. That's maybe the third step in going closer and closer into this field. Is it an organization that works close to the beneficiaries, close with partners in civil society, or is it rather an organization working on maybe a policy level, more global level, more strategic questions? That also shapes who are the people, who are the professionals they need. How much experience do they need in their field or within international cooperation when entering the field? So all this you have to find out when you are looking at these landscapes. Let's recap quickly this part here. So there is an area within international cooperation. Look at the type of organization and very much look closely. This is probably the part that takes most work, but also the most important. How does this organization work? Good. We have now situated international cooperation, what it is. We have given it a structure, and have kind of a plan, and we could decide, okay, I want to go in this part, or in this area with this type of organization. Now the question is how to get there. Now, before just starting to apply with an organization, you found out, okay, this suits me, I like this, I have a few questions to ask. Just before, until now, we were looking at the outside, the world around us, the organization. Now, before applying, it's time to look at ourselves and ask ourselves a few questions. So, first, what do you want to do, actually, in this area, on this part of international cooperation you are aiming at? The other thing is, what do you bring? What competence, what skills do you bring into that field? And then, of course, crucially, we talked before, what do the organizations need? Does it match? To what extent? Or what is the gap? What do you need more in skills, knowledge, whatever? And then the fourth questions, where are you now? From which point are you starting out to go towards international cooperation? Each of these points we could talk or have a workshop about this for hours. I will just go now into the last point, like how to approach this field. Different starting points, and we'll look at 4 standard situations. The first is the group or those who enter or want to enter international cooperation following studies, more or less, roughly under 30 years old. The next part here, people over 30, but still in the rather earlier stage of their professional development, so a few years of professional experience. Then the third part, career change. This is a situation, substantial professional experience, maybe specialized in a certain field, mid-career, I'm talking about 10, 15 or even more years of experience, and now from there approaching international cooperation. And then the situations where international cooperation is interesting, but maybe it's not the defining aspect of one's career. So you might think, okay, I'm between, I don't fit in none of these standards. Doesn't matter, you will see there are elements. Anyway, this is also an overlapping thing. I will now just go into different strategies for these different stages. Let's have a look first at the starting out after studies, trying to get into these sectors. What is important? The main principle, what you have to think up, it's really building up experience, professional experience and sector experience, that is experience in this field of international cooperation. It's a bit like collecting pieces, put them in your backpack to continue. And when do you start collecting? It's not only after studies. If possible, if you can, start before. There is maybe a paper to write during studies, you have a thesis to write, so start already to make first contacts, and then go further. In the defining part will be, most likely for many, will be internships at the beginning, preparing for junior positions that where already 2 to 3 years experience is asked for. And while doing that, don't collect the same type of pebbles in your backpack, but take maybe a big chunk here, a smaller one there. That's different, so it's also seeking experience abroad. That's very important. But it can also be in Switzerland, maybe even outside the field of international cooperation, but thinking of what am I learning here that I can use afterwards. Let's skip to this stage here, career change. What's different? Maybe 15, 20 years later entry than those we were just looking at before. It's about solid skills, I said, so it's about transferring the skills. But what's the difference between the others? Think maybe you had, if you are in this situation, maybe you had a colleague who after studies, a friend, went into international cooperation. What has this person been doing in these last 10, 15, 20 years? Experience within the sector. So, in a way, you are at a disadvantage. It's in general, in this phase, it's in general tougher, it's more complex to enter. But you have to think about the other side, the advantages. What are the advantages you have over others? This is one strategy, like highly specialized in a certain field, could be one point. Or you could also, there are organizations, there are areas or organizations within international cooperation where this experience gained within international cooperation is less crucial than in others. So you have again to look at what is there. And most likely you might to do some intermediate steps to get closer to the field, like if you were working all the time in Switzerland in a certain field, maybe edge a bit towards at least international exposure, international experience, and then some important aspects come into your experience. Now let's go in this between stage. What's here the defining things? Why I separated this from the first one is it has to do with the very first steps. On one side, people, let's say 35 years old, internships are limited in number, and very often they are rather given to the young ones. So there's competition there. And for many, after a couple of years of professional experience, or maybe you can not imagine, or your situation doesn't allow to go back to internships for financial or other reasons. So you have to find a different way. It's a bit between this first and the stage I presented, the career change, or you do take aspects from the like those entering after studies, or you come rather put the emphasis on your experience. Anyway, you will most likely at such a stage enter through specific thematic knowledge, maybe already quite specialized. That is probably the key. And again here also intermediate steps, and here as well some areas of international cooperation ask less for this building up experience within the sectors. Then finally, this last one, I will give you a few examples afterwards. This is also, of course, of transfer or use certain competencies you have, but maybe outside or just close to the field of international cooperation. Now, probably you are interested in what now? Okay, this is general, these are the principles, what I'm going to do, where I'm going to go, which organization do I want to apply? Here, I cannot give you all this indication because there are 200 people in here. That would probably be 200 cases of analyzing, okay, what's your situation? What could be a path to take in your case? So what I will do is, we have here handout that of this slide, and I will just go into a few examples. For the first two stages here, also this link here that you will find on the handout as well is very important. This is on our website. This is where the organizations, different organizations are listed with what are they doing, what do they offering for people entering, do they have internships, do they have internships for only for students, or are the internships for those who have finished studies? Do they have a junior program or junior positions, and all this information you find here. So, but let's go through a few examples. The first stage after studies, building up experience. What could be a place to look for internships? It could be at the Confederation, or this called Hochschulpraktika, Stage Academique. Or for those interested rather in the multilateral organizations, UN Youth Volunteers is a very good and attractive possibilities. Later, when you are prepared and move to junior positions after 2 years, 3 years experience, there are programs with the Confederation, United Nations, there are positions in development banks, but also don't just look at the programs, those big organizations having every year several positions, but there are also non-governmental organizations with just once in a while or 1 or 2 positions a year. For the second stage, you have seen I named it late entry. This is because this first, there are just so much more open possibilities. So you have much more to choose and find also, maybe test your motivation there. There are less possibilities. I talked already about the competition around internships. But if you are interested in humanitarian aid, that could be a field, well, it works a bit in a different way. There, the professional experience, think of medical professions, is much more important than only the experience in the sector of humanitarian aid. And there, you can imagine, for obvious reasons, there are no internships in emergency situations. That just is not cannot be imagined. Good. Let's look at an example here. What could be an example for career changers? It could be as well for specialized position in humanitarian aid. Very often the interface between private sector companies and development, something that's increasing but not very well visited, that could be a good field. Or for very highly skilled people with already international exposure in their professions, the UN or development banks, they, especially in the field of finance, they are recruiting a lot of people also from outside the development sector. That can go up to, I heard numbers from up to 80% in finance are recruited from the private sector. Then finally, the last part, just a few examples. What could that be? Other careers. It could be bénévolat, so someone who has a main profession but wants to be connected in some way to the field of international cooperation and do there something. It could be, you see there the words personal exchange in development cooperation, that's personelle Entwicklungszusammenarbeit, échange de personnel dans la coopération au développement. That's a field within the non-governmental organizations where this is more about bringing in professional experience, know-how, and working within partner organizations. So this is also a field where the previous organization experience in international development is less crucial. And this can be done for a couple of years, or some people then can manage to continue to go on in international cooperation. Then finally, just an example for this last part here. I have a friend of mine who works, is actually a consultant, as consulting with organization, private sector companies, excuse me. And what she's doing is she's consulting them in about environmental topics, about human rights especially. And we interviewed her here 2 years ago at the forum, and one of the things she said, oh, I didn't know I'm working in international cooperation. So you might also give that a thought. Is it important? How important is it to you to know this is now development cooperation or humanitarian, or do you just want to be content in what you are doing? Good. Something to the entry points or entry doors we were just evoking here. Sometimes after this door you will find a path and it's more or less clear where it's leading to, but we have also to be aware very often this is not, you are not just set on your career for the next 20 years. There will be many more other moments where you have to, well, you will have to look for other doors or just going a winding path. This leads us to the last topic of this presentation, navigating your career. I like this picture a lot because it's actually, it's a bit like navigating before GPS on the sea. So you set out in a direction, there are winds, there are currents, and and you don't all the time know where you are exactly, and then after a while, maybe you don't need to know, you just are sailing, good wind, and then after a while you have to check where I am now, and you, according to where you want to go, you adjust it, your direction and set sail in a different way. Now, navigating, there are also different ways and styles of navigating. The ones are easier, the others are more difficult, but that's maybe not the most important aspect. Important is, does it fit you? Is it your style? Some people, they have very clear ideas, I want to go there, and maybe they're also ready to take more risks, because if they missed it, the point there, they will be for a while in empty environment and maybe feel some emptiness. Others prefer not to know all the time where they are, but to have a line to stick to. And this line, this could be your values, or I want to work with this or that type of organization. Or maybe I want to stick to my profession, to my specialty, and okay, that's not a line I'm orienting my journey on. And you might also see, if you go back a bit to what I said about, or the picture actually of the boat, navigating and not knowing at all where to go is a bit difficult then to know where's my points of reference. Good. Let's look at the example of a career shortly. This is an example of development cooperation. If I would have chosen an example of humanitarian aid, it would probably look quite different. Okay, this is the portrait of Jens Engeli. And well, he was always interested in working in international cooperation. He had relatives who were working in this field. And
für ein Agronomiestudium an der Landwirtschaftlichen Fachhochschule in Zollikofen. Während des Studiums absolvierte er ein 6-monatiges Praktikum für Helvetas in Bhutan. Ein Schlüsselerlebnis für ihn. Er saugt alles Neue förmlich auf und fühlt sein Engagement für die Benachteiligten dieser Welt hautnah. Eines wird ihm klar: Das ist seine Lebensaufgabe. Doch der Einstieg in die Entwicklungszusammenarbeit will erst nicht gelingen. Und so fängt Jens seine professionelle Laufbahn in einem landwirtschaftlichen Treuhandbüro an. Nach 3 Jahren im Büro qualifiziert er sich als Flight Attendant bei der Swissair. Damit wird Jens international tätig. Nach 3 Jahren in der Luft wird Jens von Helvetas für eine Nachwuchsstelle als International Advisor in Kirgisistan rekrutiert. Solche internationalen Nachwuchsstellen sind selten, denn nur größere Teams können diese Ausbildungsaufgabe übernehmen. Mit der Stelle in Kirgisistan hat Jens den Einstieg geschafft. Gerade seine als Flight Attendant gewonnenen Sozialkompetenzen heben ihn von den anderen Bewerbern ab. Jens arbeitet 3 Jahre in Kirgisistan und anschließend 3 Jahre in Mosambik. Dann entschließt er sich für ein Diplomstudium zur Gouvernanz und Entwicklung am Institute for Development Studies in Sussex. Er will seine thematische Kenntnis im Bereich vertiefen. Aufgrund seines Masters in Gouvernanz wird er von Helvetas als Berater für Gouvernanzthemen in Bangladesch eingestellt. Jens lebt seinen Kindheitstraum. Doch er kennt auch die Schattenseiten der vielen Ortswechsel und der Arbeit in abgelegenen Gebieten. Seine langjährige Beziehung zerbricht an den Spannungen, die sich daraus ergaben. Jens entschließt sich daher für die Rückkehr in die Schweiz. Heute steuert er in der Zentrale in Bern die Programme von Helvetas Swiss Intercorporation im Balkan und hat ein Mandat für strategische Steuerung und Organisationsentwicklung. Wenn du mehr über Jens und seine Arbeit als Programmkoordinator erfahren willst, schau dir sein Video an.
Okay, this is one example. We'll just highlight a few things that are important in this part. Note, he started out with an internship during studies. Then, it didn't just work immediately. He didn't despair, he did something else, a detour. Very often in a detour, you learn other things. Then, he got this junior position. It's true, there is some luck maybe with it, but it was also the combination of he had already done something, an internship, and he had learned other things. He could combine those things, he could convince. He specialized with a second master later. He didn't do that when he failed the first attempts to enter, because then it's not that useful usually to just collect other diplomas. And then, important part of life, just think about all the effects on other aspects of your life, the work life you choose. And then after many years, he was working at headquarters. Good. There are more examples of this kind of videos and presentations about careers on our website. You'll find them here. Or also in the retrospective of the last forum, 2014, we interviewed 4 people about how they entered international cooperation. And finally, if you want to know more about entering international cooperation, I'm aware this is a journey, you don't have all the information now. Today we are here at the stand at Sanfo. You can ask questions. I will be there after 11 for a while. There's lots of information on our website, and of course today also you will find out more, and maybe you have more what to ask on the stands you are going to visit. There are also reflection days. I put here in German and French because we don't do them in English. Reflexionstage, Journée de Réflexion, which is actually a whole day about what I did here in a short time. And then more individual, we have the individual career counseling session at Sanfo. Good, let's recap it. Entering international cooperation. Know the sector. Assess yourself and your situation, and be prepared for relative uncertainty if you live a life in this field. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Beat. Now, it was a very thorough overview you gave us, many points to cover. We have a very short time to ask a couple of questions. So what I'm going to suggest is, I know you probably have loads of questions, a very good idea to go to the Sanfo stand. In the meantime, perhaps, if you'll allow me, Beat, I'll pick up on a couple of those points very quickly. Is there a contradiction? You say this is a navigation without GPS. You need flexibility, but you also need a career plan. Is there a contradiction between those things?
Not really. I said without GPS, but I'm talking about instrument of today. But what was the instrument not that many years ago? So it's useful to have a career plan. If you sail out with it having absolutely no idea, I think that's difficult. So it's maybe a bit the thing between navigating to a point. There the GPS is very useful, not to miss that point. But does it exist in career planning GPS? I'm not so sure. But the other thing is, if you have a few lines, it's like, this is important to me, and I go along this line, or I can to refer to it. Maybe you land somewhere else, but then can also refer. Okay, I'm now far away from the line I usually aimed at. Do I want to correct, or I'm happy where I'm now? Because finally, that's the base of all work. We want to be content. We want to do something we like to do.
One final but vital question, literally. Timbuktu, a dreamy place, a dangerous place. Has it got more dangerous, this profession? Should we be scared of entering it?
There is actually a tendency of that there are more fragile regions, there's more work in fragile contexts, but there also work, especially in the development field, in other contexts where the biggest danger, the biggest threat are maybe car accidents. So that's also in terms of numbers, that's a substantial part of accidents also in international cooperation. So maybe that gives you a bit information about that. And then crucial is, and that's I think later in the day we'll talk about, that's also how do you behave. That's one important part in terms of being safe, not just what's around you.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Beat. There will be more on this in this very room later today. There's also lots going on upstairs, as you know, all the stands you need for more particular information. There is, of course, the Saint-Faux stand. Quick reminder, this is being recorded, so don't worry if you miss some of the sessions. You can find them on the site, on the Saint-Faux site again. And another quick reminder, there will be at 2 points in the day today, at 12:20 and at 3:30, a visual summary of the day, a very personal take on events here today by the visual facilitator Roland Siegenthaler. Expect to be amused and entertained and have a different view. One final thing, hashtag Saint-Forum16. You can share your own views and they will be compiled on the site as well, and there'll be a link on the site. So feel free to post. I heard, I think, a tweet going on earlier. Use Twitter, use Facebook, use any means you like to communicate on this fascinating, important, and fast-moving field of international cooperation. Thank you very much for attending this session. Thank you, Beat.
Thank you.